The sailor. The deck is slick. Salt spray freezes on the rigging at 4 in the morning, off the coast of Massachusetts, January 1873. The temperature sits at 14 degrees. A man named Thomas Brennan grips a rope that cuts into his palms, the hemp stiff with ice. His breath comes in clouds that vanish into darkness. Around him, the creak of wood, the moan of wind through canvas, the smell of tar and unwashed wool, and the ocean that never stops moving. He has been awake for 19 hours. The watch bell rings. 4 bells. He does not leave his post. There are 3 more hours until dawn, and the cargo, 70,000 pounds of grain bound for Liverpool, will not deliver itself. This wasn't a job. It was the country riding on their backs across every mile of open water. Did Thomas Brennan choose this work, or did someone choose it for him? Chapter 1. The Body That Couldn't Say No. Between 1849 and 1915, thousands of American men woke up at sea with no memory of how they arrived. The practice had a name: Shanghaiing. The men who performed it were called crimps. They worked the waterfront neighborhoods of San Francisco, Portland, New York, Boston, Baltimore. They worked with trapdoors beneath saloons, with knockout drops mixed into whiskey, with fists and clubs when chemicals failed. A man drinking in a tavern at 8 in the evening might wake up 12 hours later in the hold of a vessel 3 miles offshore. The captain standing over him with a forged signature on a contract. It was legal. Not the kidnapping that occupied a gray space, but the contract. Once a sailor signed articles for a voyage, federal law made it a crime for him to leave the ship before journey's end. The penalty was imprisonment. This law dated to 1790 and remained in force for 125 years. Crimps earned what the industry called blood money. They received a fee for every body delivered to a ship, sometimes $20, sometimes $50, depending on the shortage of labor and the desperation of the captain. But the real profit came from the advance system. Sailors could draw wages ahead of time to pay debts and buy provisions. The crimp collected this advance, often 2 months of pay, on behalf of the shanghaied man, a man who might never see a single dollar. Some crimps made $9,500 per year in 1890. In today's currency, that approaches $250,000. Joseph Bunko Kelly of Portland claimed to have shanghaied 2,000 people over 15 years. In 1893, he delivered 22 men to a ship. Most were dead. They had broken into a mortuary cellar and consumed embalming fluid, mistaking it for alcohol. Kelly sold them anyway. The ship sailed before the captain discovered the truth. The shortage of sailors had a simple cause: men fled. During the California gold rush, entire crews abandoned their vessels in San Francisco Bay, leaving captains with ships full of cargo and no hands to sail them. The solution was coercion. What was never clear was how many men who went to sea wanted to be there at all. Chapter 2. The hours that belonged to the ship. A sailor worked in watches. The traditional system divided the day into segments: 4 hours on duty, 4 hours off, rotating endlessly. But the 4 hours off rarely meant rest. During daylight, off-watch sailors scrubbed decks, repaired rigging, moved cargo, maintained pumps. At night, they slept on deck if weather allowed, ready to spring to the yards at any alarm. Most sailors averaged 4 hours of actual sleep per 24-hour period. Some got less. This continued for months. Voyages from New York to San Francisco around Cape Horn lasted 120 to 150 days. Transatlantic crossings took 3 to 4 weeks in the 1800s, shortening to 8 or 9 days by the 1860s as steam replaced sail. But steam brought new dangers: boiler explosions, burns from scorching metal, lung damage from coal dust and smoke. There was no overtime. There were no weekends. The concept of a day off did not exist at sea. Sailors worked until the voyage ended or they died. When a ship reached port, pay often stopped. Many companies refused wages during dock time, a practice that persisted into the mid-20th century. A man might labor for 6 months at sea, arrive in Liverpool or Shanghai, and receive nothing while the vessel sat idle for 2 weeks, loading new cargo. The watch system created a particular kind of exhaustion. Sleep deprivation led to accidents, sailors falling from rigging, misjudging distances, walking into deck beams in darkness. The Royal Navy during the Napoleonic Wars recorded 100,000 deaths. Fewer than 6,000 came from combat. The rest, disease, accidents, mistakes made by men too tired to think clearly. But the ships kept moving. American commerce required it. Chapter 3. The Price of a Man. In 1840, an able-bodied seaman on an American merchant vessel earned approximately $15 to $18 per month. An ordinary seaman, younger, less experienced, earned $10 to $12. A landsman, green and untrained, earned $8. For comparison, a factory worker in Massachusetts earned roughly $25 per month in 1840. A skilled carpenter earned $35. Sailors earned less than almost any other labor class in America, and they paid for their own supplies. The slop chest, the ship's store, sold clothing, tobacco, and necessities at prices inflated by 50 to 100% above shore rates. These costs came out of wages. A sailor signing on for a 6-month voyage might disembark with $17 in his pocket after all deductions. By World War II, conditions had changed, but only slightly. In 1943, the War Shipping Administration conducted a study comparing merchant marine pay to military wages. The findings: an unmarried Army private earned the equivalent of $3,600 annually when benefits were calculated. A merchant seaman earned roughly the same in base pay, but received no tax exemptions, no housing allowances, no veterans' benefits. Every merchant mariner paid full income tax plus the wartime victory tax. A soldier wounded in battle received military medical care and a pension. A merchant seaman injured at sea received nothing unless his employer chose to pay. During World War II, 243,000 merchant mariners served. 9,521 died. The casualty rate exceeded 4%, higher than any branch of the American military during the war. Merchant ships became targets for German U-boats, Japanese submarines, aerial bombardment. The Murmansk Run, the convoy route delivering supplies to Soviet Russia through Arctic waters, killed hundreds. Men died in fires, in freezing water, in lifeboats adrift for months. President Roosevelt promised merchant mariners the same benefits as armed forces personnel. He died before signing the legislation. Congress never passed it. Veterans organizations opposed it, claiming mariners were motivated by high pay and avoided the draft. This was false. Merchant mariners were subject to the draft if they took more than 30 days of shore leave. Many chose the merchant marine specifically because the military refused them. Too old, too young, medically unfit for combat, but able to work a ship. 60 years passed before the United States government formally recognized World War II merchant mariners as veterans. The cargo moved regardless. Chapter 4. The Ocean as Factory Floor. Imagine a workplace that never stops shaking. Every task aboard a ship occurred on a surface in motion. Sailors climbed rigging while the mast swayed 30 degrees in each direction. They hauled lines while the deck tilted 45 degrees beneath them. They worked in storms where water came over the rails and walls, where wind speeds exceeded 70 miles per hour, where visibility dropped to zero and the next handhold might be gone when they reached for it. Falls from height were the most common fatal accident. A man climbing to furl a sail 100 feet above the deck had no safety line, no harness, no protection except his grip and his balance. If he fell onto the deck, he died. If he fell into the sea, he died. The ship did not turn around. James Duvall fell 18 feet into a hold in March 1816. He died 3 hours later at a hospital in London. His skull was fractured. He was one of thousands. Most men who fell at sea simply vanished, buried at sea in their hammocks, with no record except a line in the ship's log. Working below, deck brought different hazards. Poor ventilation filled the lower spaces with smoke from tobacco and candles, vapors from tar and bilge waste, hydrogen and carbonic acid from early ventilation systems. Sailors developed chronic lung problems. Tuberculosis spread rapidly in confined quarters. Typhus, carried by lice and rats, killed more men than storms. On whaling ships, the work included approaching 70-ton animals armed with harpoons thrown by hand. Whales destroyed boats, crushed men in their jaws, dragged them beneath the surface. Steam engine crews faced burns, explosions, heat exhaustion. Coal heavers shoveled fuel into boilers in compartments where temperatures exceeded 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Firemen tended the flames, working inches from surfaces hot enough to melt skin on contact. Mortality rates varied by trade. European coastal routes killed less than 1% of sailors per voyage. West Indies routes killed 5 to 6%. The slave trade killed 21.6% of crews between 1784 and 1790. Roughly 20,000 British sailors died working slave ships between 1780 and 1807. Yet American ships required 30,000 sailors annually by 1850. They found them. Chapter 5. The Scale of What Moved. Pull back, look at the system. Between 1790 and 1920, American merchant vessels carried the materials that built the country. Every nail, every bolt of cloth, every bag of coffee, every barrel of whale oil, every immigrant family crossed water in holds, tended by men who worked 4-hour watches and slept when they could. In 1850, the American merchant fleet numbered approximately 1,500 ocean-going vessels with a combined capacity of over 1 million tons. These ships moved 80% of American imports and 70% of exports. Cotton from southern ports to British mills. Grain from Great Lakes states to European markets. Manufactured goods from New England to California via Cape Horn. By 1914, American ships carried 25 to 30% of the nation's foreign trade. Not because the fleet shrank, it actually grew, but because global maritime traffic exploded and other nations built faster. Still, the absolute volume increased. In 1910, over 62,000 vessels called at American ports. That's 172 per day. Each required a crew. During World War II, the Merchant Marine delivered 12 million metric tons of equipment and supplies during the first Gulf War alone. Operation Desert Storm moved more than 230 government-owned and chartered vessels simultaneously. The civilian mariners crewing these ships worked under fire, knowing they were targets, understanding that they received none of the protections afforded military personnel. This wasn't background logistics. This was the physical translation of American economic power into position, the actual movement of the country's capacity to wage war, conduct trade, survive. Without sailors, the United States could not function as designed. The ships required bodies. The bodies came from somewhere, willingly or not, and they kept the system operational. Chapter 6. The Question of Choice. Not everyone was shanghaied. This matters. Many men went to sea because the alternatives were worse. Poverty, debt, dead-end factory jobs, agricultural failure, family obligation. The sea offered escape, even if that escape meant danger. A third son with no inheritance might choose a ship over watching his older brothers inherit the farm. A man fleeing debt might sign on voluntarily, knowing the ocean put him beyond the reach of creditors. The sailor population was diverse. Ships employed men from every coastal nation: Americans, British, Portuguese, Cape Verdean, Pacific Islander, Chinese. African Americans served in numbers disproportionate to their representation in the general population. Discrimination limited their opportunities on land. Ships needed labor and asked fewer questions. 3 classifications existed: landsmen with no experience, ordinary seamen with some knowledge, and able-bodied seamen, veterans who knew every rope and sail. The able seaman earned more, but stayed at sea longer. An old salt, a veteran past his prime, might work until his body failed, having no other skill and no other life. Women occasionally served, almost always disguised as men, or following husbands in unofficial capacities. They washed clothes, carried water, prepared medicine, sometimes crewed guns during naval battles. A few became pirates, but women remained rare aboard merchant vessels until the 20th century. The question isn't whether men chose the sea, it's whether they chose freely, and what constitutes freedom when the alternative is starvation. A man who signs on to escape poverty is technically a volunteer. So is a man who signs to avoid debtor's prison. So is a man drinking in a saloon who agrees to join a crew while intoxicated before a crimp forges his signature and drags him unconscious to the docks. The law made no distinction. Once aboard, the contract bound them all equally. Chapter 7. The Toll the Ocean Took. The body keeps a record even when memory fails. Sailors develop distinctive physical markers. Rope burns scarred their hands in patterns specific to their work. Hernias appeared in their groin from hauling heavy cargo. Their legs showed varicose veins from hours standing on tilting decks. Their joints swelled with arthritis from cold and damp. Many lost fingers to frostbite or to lines that jerked through their grip at speed. Tattoos marked them as sailors when identification was needed. In the early 1800s, 38% of documented tattoos showed initials, names, and dates, ways to identify corpses recovered from the water. 21% depicted maritime symbols, anchors, ships, mermaids. 9% showed patriotic imagery. Tattoos also served as proof of travel. Certain designs indicated a sailor had crossed the equator, rounded Cape Horn, visited specific ports. The process of tattooing before 1891 involved tying needles together, mixing ink with gunpowder, and piercing skin to the depth of the dermis without anesthetic. It took hours and hurt considerably. Men did it anyway. Lung damage was nearly universal among sailors who worked below deck. Smoke, tar vapors, mold, mildew, and gases from bilge water created permanent respiratory problems. Coal heavers and firemen on steamships suffered even worse, developing black lung and chronic bronchitis. Diseases spread rapidly in close quarters. Scurvy killed thousands before the British Navy mandated citrus rations. Cholera, typhus, yellow fever, malaria. Sailors encountered them all at foreign ports and brought them home. Many died in ports far from their families, buried in unmarked graves or consigned to the sea. Traumatic brain injury was common. Sailors repeatedly struck their heads on low deck beams in darkness. Over time, this caused cognitive decline, personality changes, impaired judgment, symptoms now recognized as chronic traumatic encephalopathy. A man might serve 20 years and emerge unable to think clearly, unemployable on land, forced to continue sailing because no other work would take him. Some sailors claimed to see ghosts. Ships supposedly carried curses. Men reported hearing voices in storms, seeing shapes in fog, feeling presences in empty holds. The grounded explanation: sleep deprivation causes hallucinations. Isolation produces paranoia. Trauma embeds in memory as supernatural experience. Carbon monoxide from poorly ventilated coal stoves creates confusion and auditory distortions. But the sailors themselves rarely sought grounded explanations. They lived inside the experience, and the experience felt haunted. Chapter 8. The resistance that formed the abuse eventually generated opposition. The Sailors' Union of the Pacific formed on March 6, 1885, when 300 sailors gathered on the San Francisco waterfront to protest wages and conditions. The Coast Seamen's Union merged with the Steamship Sailors' Union in 1891, creating a continuous labor organization that survives today. 140 years later, longer than any other maritime union in the world, the unions fought for specific reforms: an end to advance payments that enriched crimps, limitations on the power of captains to imprison crew members, requirements that sailors be paid off in the presence of federal shipping commissioners, and abolition of the fugitive sailor laws that made desertion a criminal offense. Andrew Furuseth, a Norwegian immigrant who sailed American ships, led the legislative campaign for decades. He pushed for the Seamen's Act of 1915, which finally abolished imprisonment for desertion, required a minimum of 75% of a crew to speak the same language as officers, and improved safety standards. The Supreme Court initially opposed these reforms. In one case, Justice John M. Harlan dissented, arguing that forcing freemen who happened to be seamen to render personal service against their will placed them in involuntary servitude, a violation of the 13th Amendment. His colleagues disagreed. They ruled that the 13th Amendment did not apply to maritime labor because the unique nature of ships required different standards. Not until the Act to prohibit Shanghaiing in 1906, and then the Seamen's Act of 1915, did the law finally recognize sailors as possessing the same rights as other workers. The union succeeded through strikes. A 1919 strike won wages described as an all-time high for deep-sea sailors in peacetime. But a strike in 1921 failed completely, resulting in 25% wage cuts and a weakened union position that lasted years. Labor organization at sea faced obstacles unknown on land. Crews disbanded after each voyage. Sailors scattered to different ports. Communication was limited. Solidarity required men to risk blacklisting, being marked as troublemakers and denied future employment. But slowly, across decades, the work became slightly less brutal, slightly less coerced. The improvement was measured in inches. With Chapter 9, the numbers that defined survival. By 1922, the American merchant fleet operated 1,800 ships with a combined capacity of 54 million deadweight tons. This represented approximately 2.6% of the world's merchant fleet, 11th place globally, behind nations like Greece, China, Japan, Panama. In 1946, immediately after World War II, American ships carried 67.6% of the nation's foreign trade. By 1960, this had collapsed to 10.5%. Today, it's lower still. The post-war fleet of 26 million tons shrank to less than 8 million tons by 2000. During the Korean War, 540 vessels were activated to support military operations. In the Gulf War of 1991, the Merchant Marine delivered 12 million metric tons of military cargo using more than 230 ships. In 2025, the United States maintains approximately 120 active military sealift command vessels, with 100 in reserve. These ships are crewed by approximately 5,500 civilian merchant mariners. But the infrastructure is aging. Many vessels in the National Defense Reserve Fleet exceed 50 years old. They were designed for 25 to 30-year service lives. Maintenance extends their function, but cannot prevent mechanical failures under the stress of high-tempo operations. The mariner shortage has reached crisis levels. A 2018 congressional report identified a deficit of more than 1,800 licensed mariners needed to fully crew available American merchant ships. This assumed 100% participation. No retirements, no deaths, no career changes. The actual shortage is larger. Between 1990 and 2021, global cargo transported by sea more than doubled, from 4 billion to nearly 11 billion tons. The American merchant marine's share of this traffic decreased every year. 90% of global trade moves by sea. The United States depends on this movement for everything: fuel, food, electronics, vehicles, raw materials, finished goods. The country can produce domestically. It cannot distribute domestically fast enough to replace maritime shipping. The trucks, trains, and planes do not have the capacity. Neither does the pipeline system. The ships must keep moving. But who will move them? Chapter 10. The erosion by degrees. The end didn't arrive suddenly. It happened through policy decisions made across 70 years, each one logical in isolation, catastrophic in aggregate. After World War II, the United States made a choice. It would dominate the seas through naval power rather than commercial shipping. The government sold surplus wartime vessels to foreign nations to rebuild their merchant marines. It helped create open registries, flags of convenience like Panama, Liberia, Marshall Islands, that allowed ship owners to avoid American labor laws and taxes. Chinese shipbuilding capacity rose from 5% of the global market in the late 1990s to over 50% by 2025. China now controls 95% of shipping container production. American shipyards closed. The workers who built Liberty ships in 1943 had no grandchildren entering the trade. The maritime academies, schools that trained officers, struggled to fill enrollment. Why study for 4 years to earn a credential for an industry that couldn't promise stable employment? Automation was supposed to solve the labor shortage. It didn't. Complex technology required more skilled operators, not fewer. You couldn't simply press a button and eliminate the crew. Someone had to monitor the systems, repair the machinery, respond to emergencies. Automated systems created new failure points. When they failed catastrophically. Wages stagnated relative to inflation. An entry-level mariner in 2025 can earn a decent income, approximately $7,000 per month for some positions. But the job requires months away from home, limited communication with family, and exposure to dangers that most workers will never face. Engineers can earn comparable pay, working at a power plant on land, going home every night. The COVID-19 pandemic broke something in the system. Merchant mariners became trapped on their ships for extended periods when ports refused to allow crew changes. Some sailors remained at sea for 20 months straight. When they finally returned to shore, many chose never to go back. The question facing the maritime industry now: if the work doesn't attract people, and the country needs the work done, what happens? Chapter 11. The container and the vanishing containerization changed everything starting in the 1950s. Before containers, cargo handling was labor-intensive. Longshoremen loaded and unloaded every crate, every box, every barrel individually. A ship might sit in port for a week or more. This employed thousands. It also made theft easy, damage common, and scheduling unreliable. Containers standardized the process. A single 40-foot box could hold up to 30 tons of cargo. Cranes lifted them directly from truck chassis to ship deck. Port time dropped from days to hours. Ships moved faster, carried more, required smaller crews. For dock workers, the result was job elimination. At one automated terminal in Long Beach, traditional operations would have required 138 crane operators and 69 signal personnel. Automation reduced this to 14 crane operators and 0 signal personnel. Marine clerks went from 30 per operation to 4. Truck drivers who moved cargo within the port, 85 positions, were replaced by automated ground vehicles requiring 2 human supervisors. The Pacific Maritime Association argued that automation increased capacity and benefited everyone. Studies showed otherwise. Automated terminals did not significantly improve productivity. They did eliminate jobs. 4% of global shipping capacity currently uses automation. That percentage is growing. For sailors aboard the vessels, containers meant less time in port, but also less connection to shore. The old system allowed crews to disembark, explore cities, interact with people beyond their shipmates. Containerization made ports transactional spaces. Arrive, load, depart. Crew members might see only the terminal and the same strip of waterfront bars in every city. The work became more isolated, even as communication technology improved. Starlink satellite internet now provides connectivity at sea, a significant improvement over the radio silence of previous generations. But connectivity cannot replace human presence. Some sailors report that the job feels less real now. The cargo is invisible inside containers. The ports look identical. The machinery does most of the physical work. What remains is monitoring, maintenance, waiting. But the cargo still has to move, and someone still has to be there when the systems fail. Chapter 12. The Inheritance. Of salt families exist where fathers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers went to sea. In coastal towns, the pattern repeated. A boy grows up hearing stories, watches ships in the harbor, eventually signs on for his first voyage. Some find it suits them. Most discover it doesn't. But by then, they have no other skills and no other prospects. They continue sailing. The culture that developed among sailors emphasized endurance, self-reliance, dark humor. Men who worked on ships learned to function with minimal sleep, to ignore pain, to suppress fear. They developed rituals, tattoos for milestones, initiation ceremonies for crossing the equator, specific phrases and songs that marked them as members of the community. Sea shanties served functional purposes. The rhythmic work songs coordinated efforts when hauling ropes or raising anchors. The lyrics were often obscene, sometimes political, occasionally mournful. They helped men work in synchrony and pass time during the repetitive tasks that filled their days. The literature sailors produced, memoirs, journals, letters, reveals people acutely aware of their own expendability. They understood that ships needed bodies more than they needed individuals. A man who died at sea could be replaced at the next port. The system adapted and continued. Yet within this system, people formed bonds. Sailors depended on each other for survival in ways that land-based workers rarely experience. Trust wasn't optional. If your crewmate made a mistake while working the rigging in a storm, you both died. This created intense, brief relationships that dissolved when the voyage ended, then reformed with new crews on the next ship. Some sailors never adjusted to life on land. After years at sea, they found the stability of ground disorienting. They missed the motion, the routine, the clarity of purpose that came from having one job: keep the ship moving. Their descendants inherited a complicated legacy. Pride in the work mixed with knowledge of the cost. The sea gave families a livelihood. It also took fathers, brothers, sons who left port and never returned. In maritime communities, people don't ask why someone went to sea. They ask when they'll come back and whether they'll go again. Chapter 13. The Present That Repeats. In 2025, the global maritime industry faces a shortage of approximately 26,000 officers certified for international waters. This number is expected to triple by 2026. The reasons mirror those of 1885. Difficult working conditions, long periods away from family, wages that haven't kept pace with inflation, limited career advancement, and the availability of comparable jobs on land with better quality of life. The International Maritime Organization is developing a net zero framework for 2050, requiring the entire shipping industry to eliminate carbon emissions within 25 years. This will necessitate fleet renewal, port adaptation, alternative fuel infrastructure, and complete retraining of the workforce. The cost will be enormous. The timeline is tight. Meanwhile, cyber attacks on maritime systems have increased. Ships rely on GPS, automated navigation, digital communication. These systems can be compromised. When they fail, crews must revert to traditional navigation methods, but fewer sailors today have training in celestial navigation or piloting without electronic assistance. Geopolitical tensions threaten shipping routes. The Red Sea has become too dangerous for many commercial vessels following attacks by Houthi forces. Ships now route around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 14 days to transit times and absorbing 6 to 9% of global shipping capacity into longer journeys. The Suez Canal, normally carrying massive traffic volumes, operated at 70% below its 2023 levels by May 2025. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 11% of global trade and one-third of seaborne oil passes, remains vulnerable to disruption. American merchant marine capacity has continued declining. The Jones Act, requiring goods shipped between American ports to be carried on American-built, American-crewed, American-flagged vessels, maintains a domestic fleet of approximately 300 ocean-going ships. But this is less than 20% of what operated in 1960. When the next war comes, or the next pandemic, or the next supply chain crisis, the question will be the same one asked in every previous emergency. Are there enough sailors? And the answer, increasingly, is no. Chapter 14. The question that remains. Consider what maritime work represents. It is labor that makes other people's lives possible while remaining invisible to them. The goods appear on shelves. The fuel arrives at stations. The materials show up at factories. Consumers see the end result, but not the movement, not the people who accomplish the movement, not the cost of keeping everything in motion. This is not unique to sailors. Many forms of infrastructure labor share this quality. Invisible until it stops. Essential only when it's absent. But maritime work carries additional burdens. It removes workers from their communities for months at a time. It exposes them to dangers that have decreased, but not disappeared. It asks them to accept isolation, discomfort, and uncertainty in exchange for wages that, while adequate, are not exceptional. The romanticization of sailors, the image of adventure, freedom, exotic ports, persists in cultural memory, but doesn't match reality. Most sailors describe their work as monotonous, punctuated by terror. Hours of routine, followed by moments of crisis. Long stretches of boredom, then sudden demands for skill and stamina that determine whether everyone survives. The people who choose this work today do so knowing its costs. They are not shanghaied. They sign on voluntarily. But voluntary doesn't mean easy, and it doesn't mean the choice was made with abundant alternatives. What happens when a necessary job becomes unattractive? When the working conditions, separated from their historical context, compare unfavorably to other available employment? The standard answer involves raising wages, improving conditions, offering better benefits. These help. They are necessary, but they may not be sufficient. Because the fundamental nature of the work hasn't changed. Ships still need human crews. Those crews must still leave their families, live in confined spaces, work irregular hours, and accept that the ocean can kill them. Technology has made the work safer and communication easier. It has not made the work compatible with the life patterns most people prefer. Stable home, daily routine, predictable schedule, proximity to loved ones. Chapter 15. The Choice. America faces. Here is the situation as it exists. The United States depends on maritime shipping for survival, not economic prosperity, survival. The country cannot feed itself, fuel itself, or maintain its population's standard of living without goods that arrive by sea. The American merchant marine fleet is shrinking. The workforce is aging. Young people aren't replacing those who retire. The maritime academies can't fill their classes with qualified candidates. Other nations are filling the gap. Chinese, Greek, Japanese, and Filipino sailors crew increasing percentages of the global fleet. Ships flagged in Panama, Liberia, and the Marshall Islands, technically foreign vessels, but often owned by American companies, employ workers who earn less and have fewer protections than American mariners. This reduces costs. It also transfers dependency. If a crisis prevents foreign crew members from working American-owned ships, the country has limited ability to maintain its supply lines using domestic labor alone. The strategic sea lift capacity, the reserve of ships and trained mariners available for military operations, stands at dangerously low levels. During the Gulf War, some activated vessels couldn't sail because not enough qualified sailors were available to crew them. Ships sat loaded at docks, unable to deliver critical military cargo, because the people who knew how to operate them were insufficient in number or unable to reach their assigned vessels in time. This is the scenario planners have warned about for 20 years. The warnings continue. The trend continues. The gap grows. Policy options exist. Higher subsidies for maritime education, better wages and benefits for mariners, requirements that a larger percentage of trade goods travel on American-crewed vessels, investment in shipbuilding infrastructure, promotion campaigns to increase interest in maritime careers. None of these options has generated sufficient political will to reverse the decline, which leaves a binary question. Does the country rebuild its maritime workforce, accepting the costs and inefficiencies this involves, or does it continue the present course and accept the vulnerabilities that come with dependence on foreign-flagged vessels and international crews? Both choices have consequences. Neither is cost-free. But doing nothing is also a choice. The ocean hasn't changed. It remains the same expanse of salt water and distance it has always been. The ships crossing it are larger, faster, more efficient. The technology is extraordinary. The fundamental fact hasn't altered. Someone has to be there. Thomas Brennan, standing on deck in the darkness of 1873, probably never imagined that his profession would someday seem obsolete. He would have found the idea absurd. Ships require sailors. This was obvious. But obvious things become uncertain when economics shift, when the cost of American labor exceeds the benefit, when the discomfort of the work outweighs the appeal, when machines can perform some functions and foreign workers can perform the rest at lower wages. The sailors who remain today work under conditions that would have seemed luxurious to Thomas Brennan. Climate control, satellite internet, modern medicine, safety equipment, labor laws, paid leave. They are not shanghaied. They are not trapped by fugitive sailor laws. They can leave when their contract expires. Most still do. They serve a few years, see what the work demands, calculate the cost to their personal lives, and find other employment. A small number stay, making careers of the sea, becoming the core workforce that keeps the system functional. Is this enough? Will there be enough sailors to crew the ships that move 90% of global trade, that deliver the materials America needs to function, that provide the strategic sea lift capacity required in wartime? The question isn't whether sailors are skilled or dedicated. They are. The question is whether the country will create the conditions, economic, social, political, that make enough people willing to do the work. The cargo is sitting in containers at ports, waiting. The ships are built, maintained, ready to sail. The routes are mapped. The demand is constant. All that's missing are the people who choose, or don't choose, to stand on a deck in darkness while the ocean moves beneath them. Do we need them more than they need us?